So, let's get this out of the way with first. I'm not making this video to add to the lore of this haunted house. I'm making this video to kind of give a conclusion after so many years of maybe a different perspective on some of the things that were, validated and some of the things that were maybe looked at a little too closely and, was maybe blown out of proportion. Was that house haunted? Yeah, but was it haunted to necessarily the degree that I would maybe imply when I was 16 years old? No. Don't get me wrong, the house was haunted, and it would be kind of disrespectful to devalue everything that we had experienced, things like the very long EVP that we caught on the quote-unquote night of intensity, or the very loud banging the walls that me, my Aunt Candy, and Matthew all experienced together, as well as things like, the EVP that says, "I can still hear you," when the house was empty and it was in the middle of the house. You can define all of these things as paranormal encounters for strictly just the loose definition that we can't really explain it. But when it comes to like the house being demonically haunted and things being more suggested as being demonically haunted, like to a Hollywood movie style, no, it's not how it was. It's never how it was. The reality is this house was more so a family house. It was just the house everyone would gather at family functions, holidays, things of that nature. But it was always, the house had a unique way of always serving the purpose that it needed to. When it was a house that was just a home for a small family, it was. When it was a party house, it was. And when it was a haunted house, it was. And that was always something that I kind of would look at, but that's another example of reading too far into something that maybe didn't deserve that kind of attention. When I really decided to make this video, it was because it was in the middle of me making the documentary, which is almost a year old at this point, and it was really me trying to explain further that my view of the house and its paranormal activity was diluted a bit by the fact that I wanted it to be haunted. It was going to be the thing that made me famous, or at least that's how I thought about it at the time. And I made that documentary years after I actually conducted that interview, all of those interviews, and it's funny because going back, the original direction of this documentary was nothing like it had turned out to be in the final product. I remember how I was so out of touch with what story really needed to be told, and I laugh at this younger version of myself because this story being told was completely different than the story that needed to be told, in my opinion. There were so many things that didn't make that final cut because I didn't have any documentation of it. There was one story where Matthew and I found this chalkboard and it had like letters on it, so we thought it was an Ouija board. So Matthew took it outside and he smashed it and we started acting weird. And we don't have like any real memory of it now, or Matthew doesn't at least. I have a vague memory of it, and it's only because I look at it now and I'm kind of like, that was a little silly. He took a chalkboard and smashed it and we started acting weird. And I don't know if it was like legit, if anything really caused us to start acting weird, but I do remember the general vibe of that entire moment was that it was really uncomfortable, but I think it was one of those moments where we really just psyched each other out. Another moment that I thought was really interesting was there was this time where, it was right when I was starting ghost hunting that house like consistently. I walked up to the front door and I went to open it. My mom was just visiting with my grandma, so I took the key and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go ghost hunting." I went to the door and I just remember I heard what sounded like a busy kitchen. I was really unsure about entering because more terrifying than the ghosts at that point was, is there another person who's gonna potentially hurt me in here? So I went around to the porch side. I looked through the door. Again, I didn't see anything. I remember when I looked through the front door initially, I didn't see anything. Like, There was no movement, there was no lights, there was nothing out of the ordinary, all the doors were shut, things like that. So I went over to my grandma, I'm like, hey, so, you're never gonna believe this, there seems to be someone in the house. Do you mind, like, what, should I lock it? What do I do? And she was like, no, let's go see. So she grabs a baseball bat, my 50-year-old grandmother at the time, she walks over. We open that front door, and she's wielding this bat, but I will never forget when we opened that door, the basement door was wide open, which it wasn't before. The pots and pan noises had stopped. I remember the lights to the basement were on, and there were paint cans everywhere. It looked like someone lit off a paint can bomb. And we all kind of, my mom was on the porch with us, and we all kind of just looked at each other and shut the door, locked it, walked away. Don't know if it was human, don't know if it was paranormal, but I do know that it was something undesired that we did not want to see the conclusion to, so we all walked away. These moments, these things that happened, like the real things, like the banging on the walls upstairs, or the shadow figures, or, you know, just the things that we did manage to catch that we can conclude were paranormal. These things had this nature about them that they were valid, but because of that, my viewpoint became that this place was demonically haunted, when in reality, I don't really think it was. It had weird synchronicities and continuities, like the rosaries, for example. Rosaries breaking in that house was a thing that happened more often than maybe it should have. But at the same time, I can't really, there's really no way to give a proper conclusion on something like that. The entirety of my time there was kind of blown out of proportion because my identity became tied to that house and tied to ghost hunting. I was the ghost hunter. When I went to school, that was kind of my thing, which that's not really a normal thing. People aren't just the ghost hunter, they're, you know, like the jock or, you know, the emo kid. I was the ghost hunter. When I lost that house was really my go-to place, and when I lost it, I was just like, damn, you know, I don't know what I'm gonna do anymore because that house was who I was. And so I think that unhealthy viewpoint really is what made me start to believe that there was so much more to this than maybe there really was. I remember when I did that interview, the whole original point was going to be how I became obsessed and how demonic hauntings lure you in, which there is a point to be made with that, but I don't think that that's necessarily my personal story to tell, or even that house's for that matter. The reality is that house was haunted, but not to the degree that maybe I had implied, especially in those interviews that I did. I remember when I was editing the whole thing, I kind of laughed at myself because I was like, this is a bit much, my guy, and I had to, you know, tone some of it back because I was just like, this doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem right, and it doesn't necessarily tell an honest story, which at that point in my life, I was more interested in being like, okay, let's make a basic ghost hunting documentary about this house. I kind of stopped ghost hunting after that documentary, and I made the decision that I was done. Because, truth be told, I had no desire. Everything that I wanted to do in ghost hunting was done. I had proven to myself that paranormal is more real than not, and that I made a documentary about my grandma's house, which that was always kind of the point of me doing all the things that I did. It's unique giving a retrospective about everything that happened, because was it the most haunted, scary house in the world? No, because children were always there and they were always playing in the playground. Family was always there and they were just visiting, having a good time. Like, I remember when I was a kid, yeah, like I mentioned at the beginning of the documentary, I have a very Italian culture family, so the paranormal wasn't a matter of if, it was just a matter of certainty. So the kids would always mess with each other in that regard, and the adults would feed it. So of course, I would always have this background idea that this house is scary and haunted. It was what I grew up believing. And not just me, but the many adults that preceded it. I'm able to have this unique perspective where I'm allowed to look back and be more honest about things that maybe were amplified to tell a more horror style of a story. And if I'm honest, I like the original story much better, of it being the family home, it was haunted at the end, and the fond memories far outweigh any sort of negative memory of that house. That house truly was my childhood home, and it's really weird. I haven't talked about it this much in a very long time, other than maybe if a family member brought it up and we're talking about the things that I caught. Only in that regard is it something that I bring up anymore. Because now that I've matured a bit, I can look at it and say, that was my family home. That was my childhood home. I don't really look at it anymore as, oh, that's the haunted house. I am tied to it still, which is why I kind of still will talk about it and remind myself that, yeah, those things were real, that did happen. But at the same time, it's important to know that it was not as bad as maybe that video, the documentary, would suggest. Because in order for it to be that bad and to be that real, I would have needed to call a priest. There's no other way around that. And I never needed to, so. There was this unique thing in the original format of the old documentary that ghosts had this unique ability to manipulate your life. And I think the only real outcome of it manipulating my life was that I held on to it for so long. If you're gonna do this, you gotta learn to separate who you are and who you are as a ghost hunter. Because if who you are is just the ghost hunter, there's a lot to life that you're going to miss out on. 7900 today is just a plot of land that holds construction material and trailers and equipment. It's not really anything anymore. I haven't driven past it in a very long time. Last time I saw it, it was just an empty field. The fence wasn't even really around it. So the maturity level has definitely changed from the time that I was ghost hunting to now. Because I believe if I was able to ghost hunt that house now, things would be way different. I have better equipment, but in general, it would just be different because I have a more mature approach to stuff. I'm not going to try and force this fabricated narrative that, you know, the house is demonically haunted and this should be the next Shining or, you know, whatever. It's just a memory, and that is kind of the most beautiful thing about the whole experience, is that now it's a memory. Now it's something that in the future around a campfire I can tell people, and it's a real story. And I think that in a way, that's the way 7900 kind of lives on its own legacy, if you will, is that it's a memory that, at least for me, will never go away.